The sun is going down somewhere in Ohio. The year is 1971. You're in the back seat of a station wagon, still warm from the day, wearing pajamas your mother made you change into before you left the house. Through the windshield, the screen, enormous, white, slightly warped at the bottom, is just beginning to glow. Your father hooks a small metal speaker over the half-rolled window. It crackles. Static, then music. Someone 2 rows ahead taps their horn by accident, and a few people laugh. The smell of popcorn drifts in from the snack bar, 100 yards away, mixing with the evening air and the faint scent of car exhaust and summer grass. Your mother is unwrapping sandwiches she made at home. Your little sister is already asleep against the door. The cartoons haven't even started yet, but you're already exactly where you want to be. The gravel crunches under tires as late arrivals search for the perfect spot, not too close to the screen where you'd strain your neck, not too far back where the image would blur, just right, where the giant figures on the screen filled your vision but didn't overwhelm it. The ritual was always the same. Find your spot, turn off the engine, grab the speaker, settle in. At its peak, there were more than 4,000 drive-in theaters operating across the United States, not in major cities, mostly. In the in-between places, along the 2-lane highways outside of mid-sized towns, on the flat land at the edge of things, where you could put up a screen big enough to see from a quarter-mile away and nobody would complain about the light. These weren't elegant structures, they were practical. A field, a screen, a projection booth, and rows of speaker posts marching across the gravel lot like metallic soldiers. The drive-in was invented almost by accident. Richard Hollingshead Jr., a man who sold auto parts in New Jersey, had a mother who found conventional movie seats uncomfortable. In 1932, he experimented in his own driveway, nailing a screen to some trees, setting up a projector on the hood of his car, running a radio behind the screen for sound. He tested different angles, different heights, figuring out how to create sightlines so cars in back could see over cars in front. He patented the concept in 1933, and by June of that year, the first commercial drive-in opened in Camden, New Jersey. Admission was 25 cents per person, $1 maximum per car. The idea spread slowly at first. Through the late 1930s and into the war years, there were only a few hundred scattered across the country. But after 1945, when returning veterans started families, and those families started buying cars and moving to places with space to park them, the drive-in fit perfectly into the shape of American life as it was being rebuilt. Suburban, mobile, family-oriented but still craving entertainment. By 1958, there were more than 4,000 screens across the country. For a single decade, the drive-in wasn't a novelty, it was an institution. What made it work wasn't the movies, though the movies mattered, it was the format, the democracy of it. A regular movie theater required you to find a sitter, get dressed, sit still, stay quiet, and behave like adults in a public space. The drive-in required none of that. You loaded the kids into the car in whatever they were wearing. Pajamas were not just acceptable, but encouraged. You brought your own food if you wanted. You talked when you felt like it. You could smoke without bothering anyone. If a baby cried, it was your car and your problem, and nobody else could really hear it anyway. Teenagers came in pairs and pointed their cars toward the back rows, away from their parents, and the whole parking lot operated as a kind of loosely organized private world inside a shared public space. The snack bar was its own universe. The intermission came between the first and second features. Drive-ins almost always showed 2 films, and the projector booth would run the famous countdown reels. Animated hot dogs dancing toward buns, a cartoon soda cup with a straw and a cheerful expression. A timer counting down the minutes until the second feature started. These weren't just advertisements, they were part of the ritual, as predictable as the sunset that started each evening's show. Kids poured out of cars like water. Parents dug change out of the center console, calculated whether they had enough for milk duds and popcorn, and maybe a soda to share. The line at the counter was half the experience. You saw neighbors you hadn't expected to see. You compared notes on the first movie. You stretched legs that had been folded in car seats. The food was expensive by drive-in standards, but it was part of the package. Fresh popcorn in red and white striped boxes. Candy that somehow tasted better under the stars. You paid for a car, not for seats. A family of 5 paid the same as a couple. Word spread quietly that if you were 17 and short on cash, the trunk of a car could fit 2 friends, and nobody was checking very carefully at the entrance. The attendants knew. Everyone knew. But the drive-in tolerated this, the way it tolerated most things. It was built for informality, for families, for making entertainment accessible to people who couldn't afford to take the whole family to a downtown theater. The first cracks appeared in the early 1960s, though they didn't look like cracks at the time. They looked like prosperity. Suburbanization, the same force that had built the drive-in's audience, was also beginning to rearrange it. The outer edges of town, where land was cheap enough to put up a screen, were no longer the outer edges of town. Subdivisions followed subdivisions. Shopping centers sprouted next to residential developments. Land values rose. Property taxes followed. Operators who had bought their lots in the late 1940s for almost nothing were sitting on real estate that was suddenly worth a great deal more as a shopping center than as a place to watch movies from your car. Some sold immediately, taking the windfall and retiring. Others held on and watched their neighborhoods change around them. The screen that had once stood at the edge of an open field, visible for miles, was now flanked by apartment complexes whose residents did not appreciate the light flooding their bedrooms or the traffic that clogged their streets on Friday and Saturday nights. Noise complaints increased. City councils that had once welcomed drive-ins as family-friendly businesses began treating them as nuisances to be regulated. Then came the time problem, which had always been there but was becoming more acute. Drive-ins could only operate after dark. That was the fundamental limitation that shaped everything else about the business. In summer, that meant the first feature couldn't start until after 9 o'clock, sometimes later. A double feature would run past midnight. The drive-in's prime season was summer. Its prime hours were late, and neither worked in its favor when competition arrived that was open year-round, in climate-controlled buildings. Weather was always an issue. Rain meant no show. Snow meant closed for the season. Even heavy dew could make the experience miserable, fogging windshields and chilling anyone brave enough to sit outside their car. You were at the mercy of the sky, in a way that indoor theaters never were. The multiplex changed everything permanently. Through the 1970s, indoor theaters began building more screens under one roof. Instead of the old single-screen movie houses downtown, suburban multiplexes offered 4, 6, 8 different films at any given time. More screens meant more showtimes. You could see a movie at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, in January, in a warm seat with perfect sound. The drive-in's advantages started to look smaller against that convenience. Daylight saving time made things worse in ways the industry hadn't anticipated. When Congress extended it in 1974, it pushed sunset later into the evening during peak movie-going season. Shows that had been starting at 8:30 were now starting after 9:30. Attendance dropped, concession sales dropped with it. The math got tighter. The home video market finished what daylight saving had started. When VCRs arrived in the late 1970s and video rental stores followed through the early 1980s, the living room became a theater. You could watch a movie at home on your schedule, without driving anywhere or waiting for dark. You didn't have to worry about weather or speaker quality, or the teenagers in the car next to you making noise during the quiet scenes. The drive-in had always sold something beyond the film itself, the outing, the ritual, the particular kind of togetherness you could only get in a car in a dark field shared with 100 other families doing the same thing. But it turned out that what most people actually wanted, when they were honest about it, was the movie. And the movie was now available somewhere easier. The economics became impossible to ignore. A drive-in needed several hundred cars to break even on any given night. That meant clear weather, popular movies, and families willing to make the drive and pay the admission and buy the overpriced snacks. Too many variables. Too many chances for something to go wrong. Indoor theaters needed fewer customers per screen and could operate year-round. When attendance dropped, they could cut showtimes. When attendance dropped at a drive-in, the whole operation became unprofitable. The closures came steadily through the 1980s. A few hundred screens a year, quietly folding. No dramatic announcements. No campaigns to save them. Just a sign going dark. A gate that didn't open on Friday night. A classified ad in the local paper advertising the speaker posts and projection equipment for sale. The screens themselves were harder to get rid of. Some were demolished. Others were left to weather and decay, slowly falling apart until they became safety hazards and had to be torn down anyway. By 1990, fewer than 1,000 drive-ins remained nationwide. By 2000, that number was closer to 400. The lots became strip malls, storage facilities, car dealerships. The screens came down or simply fell over in winter storms. The speaker posts were pulled up and sold for scrap. In some towns, all that remained was the distinctive bowl-shaped landscape, the gentle slopes that had been graded to give every car a clear view of the screen, now growing weeds or turned into parking for the shopping center that replaced the drive-in. What went with them was a specific kind of evening that no longer has a replacement. The drive-in was the only public space in American life where you were genuinely allowed to be private. You carried your home into it, your car, your family, your own small territory. But you were also part of something larger, a field full of other families doing the same thing. All of you together, all of you separate, all of you looking in the same direction at the same massive screen. Modern outdoor movie screenings try to recreate this, but they miss the essential element. The car. At a drive-in, you weren't sitting on a blanket on the ground with strangers you had to navigate around and apologize to every time you got up. You were in your own mobile living room, with your own doors you could close, your own climate control, your own soundtrack if you wanted to turn off the speaker and use the radio instead. The car was what made it work. The car was what made it yours. The car was the difference between being in public and being at home while somehow being both at the same time. There was also something about the scale of it. The screen was enormous in a way that today's flat screens, no matter how large, can never match, not just because of size, but because of context. It stood alone against the sky, lit from behind, visible from miles away. When you drove toward the drive-in as the sun was setting, you could see the screen from a distance, glowing white against the darkening horizon. It was a landmark, a destination, a promise of the evening ahead. The sound system was terrible by today's standards. Those speakers were tinny, prone to static, always slightly too loud or too soft, but they were yours. Each car had its own speaker, its own volume control, its own connection to the movie. If your speaker went out, someone from the projection booth would come around with a replacement. It was personal service in a way that seems almost quaint now. If you remember the weight of that speaker on the window, the way it pulled the glass down just slightly, the metallic voice coming through the mesh, you remember something most people have never experienced. You remember a Thursday night in 1976 when the world arranged itself perfectly around you, and all you had to do was sit back and watch. You remember falling asleep in the back seat during the second feature, waking up as your father hung the speaker back on its post, the screen going dark, the field emptying car by car until it was just another empty lot under the stars. Where was your drive-in? Which town? What was the last movie you saw there? Do you remember what you ordered at the snack bar? Whether you stayed awake for the second feature, whether you were sad when it closed, or if you only noticed years later when you drove past and realized the screen was gone. Those details don't fade the way other memories do. They're still there, as clear as that enormous screen against the summer sky, as permanent as the things we thought would never change but did anyway, quietly, while we weren't paying attention.